Hey, how do you feel about taking a trip back in time? We're diving into the history of the Amazon forest to unravel the mystery of its lost cities. Grab your bug spray and hop on. The Amazon forest is the world's largest rainforest. The environment there can be extremely challenging for human life. Yet, the legend goes that the Amazon has been home to sprawling settlements rich in unmeasurable wealth. Could that really be true? Or is that none other than a figment of our collective imagination? The legend of El Dorado might be the myth that started this whole thing. As European explorers began their excavations in American lands back in the 1500s, word got out of an Amazonian civilization that used to paint their leader in gold as an offering to higher powers. The legend of El Hombre Dorado, aka the Golden Man, began to quickly spread around Europe. Explorers got excited at the possibility of finding an infinite amount of gold somewhere deep within the Latin American jungle. And as you can imagine, expeditions to the continent began to multiply with each passing year. It didn't take long before explorers found this civilization. They were known as the Muisca people and were located in Colombia, near Lake Gudavia. The Muisca people had a tradition of painting their leader, aka the Zipa, from head to toe in gold. In a ceremonial gesture, the Zipa would swim into the river, spreading gold dust all over the lake. For the Muisca, this was their way of acknowledging and thanking the higher powers of the universe they believed in. When European explorers heard and witnessed this practice, they were amazed. For them, gold was used solely for commercial purposes as their main currency for trade. This made them think that the Muisca people must have stacks and stacks of gold hidden somewhere in the jungle for them to use it so abundantly. Well, that's how the legend of El Dorado was born. What was once the practice of El Hombre Dorado traveled on word of mouth until it became El Dorado, a fictional city that was most likely to hide piles of gold. The hunt for this city led Europeans to spend large amounts of money to scour the Amazon forest. Unfortunately, all of their expeditions came back empty-handed. That is, if they ever came back at all. Now, jump to the beginning of the 1900s. In England, the Royal Geographic Society, a prestigious British institution, was looking for somebody willing to travel down to Latin America to trace the border between Brazil and Bolivia. More specifically, the part of the border that is nestled deep within the Amazon rainforest. One Sir Percy Fawcett was a Latin American aficionado, and he gladly volunteered to do the job. Oh, it's important to note that the Amazon forest is virtually the size of the continental USA. It sprawls across 8 countries, including Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia. And trust me, getting around is no easy feat. The jungle is covered in dense vegetation, and in addition to that, it's home to insane predators such as anaconda snakes, panthers, crocodiles, piranhas, and so on. But despite all that, Fawcett was very successful in his mapping adventure and seemed to be wanting to come back more. Back in England, Fawcett would scour diaries from other explorers hoping to learn more about the ancient Amazonian civilizations. He would read about the Incas and the Mayans and the great empires they built. He believed that if the Incas were capable of building empires that stretched over 2 million square miles, this could mean that other Amazonian civilizations could have thrived there too. During his research, Fawcett came across a report from a 16th century explorer. The report told of a city deep within the Amazon forest that held unimaginable quantities of minerals, a town that stretched for 15 miles without any space from a house to house. This report fueled Fawcett's imagination to a new extreme. From then on, he became obsessed with finding what he called the lost city of Z. Over years, Fawcett searched the Amazon forest, usually looking for stone ruins that could possibly indicate human settlements. On his later expeditions, he focused on exploring the state of Mato Grosso in central Brazil. He would travel from Europe and into the lower region of the Xingu River. The trip to the Xingu would take him around 14 days on foot. Then, he would set sail in small wooden boats accompanied by local indigenous leaders that knew the region better than anyone. How he communicated with the indigenous population is still a mystery, since they only spoke in local dialects. Some scientists believe that this could have been the real reason why he never found the city. They believed he wasn't able to communicate what exactly he was looking for. And this was not his greatest difficulty. As we've said before, Amazon is not a kind place for its visitors. In his diaries, Fawcett tells of encounters with a 60-foot-long anaconda, which he bravely survived. He writes of endless sleepless nights and waking up with his hands and feet swollen from mosquito bites. Some of his peers said he was invincible and tireless, but the day came during his 8th expedition when he didn't make it back home. Fawcett disappeared without leaving any trace behind. Some even suspect that he was close to reaching his lifelong goal. On the day of his disappearance, he sent an optimistic letter to his wife saying there was nothing to fear, and that he was setting out on a certain final search. Fawcett's failed attempt to find ruins seemed to support what had become a consensus among experts at the time, that this rainforest was too inhospitable to support large, complex societies, let alone cities. Experts were convinced that the Amazon's lost cities were nothing more than fiction. That is, until the 1960s, when modern research began to find evidence that suggested otherwise. Scientists discovered patches of extremely fertile soil. They called it Black Earth. And apparently, they found lots of it in the Amazon, especially alongside rivers. Further research even showed that such soil was created by human waste or the intentional burning of forests, which adds nutrients to the soil below, which could only mean bingo! The discovery of Black Earth was the evidence that large-scale agriculture was possible and probably did exist amidst the Amazon, confirming that settlements could have formed there after all. In the 1990s, along the Xingsu River in Brazil, a team of archaeologists from the University of Florida made a remarkable discovery. Working alongside local indigenous people, they found very long ditches. After mapping them, they realized that these ditches were a sign of a big settlement. They were remnants of carefully designed walls centered around a plaza. Some were roads that led to more settlements. In fact, just this part of the Amazon, about the size of New Jersey, was once a network of dozens of settlements that experts believe could have been home to at least 50,000 people between 1250 and 1650 CE. Other discoveries were possible thanks to LiDAR imaging, a type of technology that allows researchers to take satellite pictures of the forest's ground without having to step inside of it. A network of trenches in Acre, Brazil, dates back to 200 to 1200 CE. These suggest settlements that could have supported 60,000 people. Other images from near the Xingu River suggest cities that could have housed about 50 million people. These were the lost cities of the Amazon. Believe it or not, these images suggest that Fawcett was very close to a major discovery. He was looking for the ruins in the right place, but he was looking for the wrong thing. Unlike cities such as Cusco, which used stone as their primary material, Amazonian settlements used wood and earth to build their cities. These materials are highly deteriorating and probably decomposed over time. Finding them required a bit more technology than what Fawcett had available at his time.
It's the first day of your long-awaited trip to the Amazon forest. You flew all the way to South America. More specifically, you landed in the city of Manaus. It's the heart of the Brazilian Amazon. So far, you've traveled by air, car, and now water. You are on a tiny boat moving through the dark waters of the Amazon River. Yes, the river is also called the Amazon. And just FYI, it's the second longest river in the world. It loses only to the Nile River in Egypt. The Amazon sprawls for an impressive 2,700 square miles, beginning in Peru and ending only when it meets the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Brazil. To get a closer look at the forest, you decide to start by exploring it by boat. First up, you watch some piranha fishing. You can even try to catch one yourself if you like. As you may know, piranhas are carnivorous fish that inhabit the Amazon River, so it might not be your best option to go swimming in these waters. One of the most emblematic species of alligators present in the Amazon River basin is the broad-snouted caiman. It looks pretty much like a regular alligator, except for the fact that it has a yellow chin. Your guide leaves the boat and searches the water to show you a caiman up close. He also tells you of another legendary creature that lives in the dark waters of the river, the pink dolphin. Lucky you get to witness a family of pink dolphins showing their fins near your boat. They look magical from the place where you're sitting. You've probably never known dolphins can be pink, huh? After a few mesmerizing moments, you discover that the dolphin's pink color is nothing but an illusion. The animals are originally pinkish-gray, but due to the brown colors of the Amazon River, they look vivid pink when you stare at them from above. Your guide tells you that the pink dolphin is a central character of Brazilian folklore. Locals believe that the pink dolphins can turn into humans and wander off into towns at night. You get off your boat near one of the entrances to the forest. Now you're going to continue your trip on foot. Your guide says that you are venturing into very dangerous terrain. The Amazon is home to some of the creepiest species of wildlife on the globe, but don't worry, we'll get to see a lot of them today. You've come prepared, of course. Bug spray, a raincoat, and your sharp eyes. Inside the jungle, you need to be alert at all times. You may have heard legends of the anaconda, a snake that can swallow animals as big as a cow in one go. Sorry to break it to you, but those are not just legends. Reptiles like these do actually exist. They live deep in the jungle. Is it right there, moving between the trees? Is it a spider? The so-called Goliath bird-eater is a monster spider. Its legs can grow up to a foot in length, and the spider itself can weigh around 6 ounces. It's also known as the king of tarantulas. You shouldn't get too close, of course. It's not venomous to humans, but its bite can surely sting. As its name suggests, the Goliath bird-eater can even eat birds, as long as they are smaller than it is. Up next, you run into another species of spider that draws your attention. This one is so tiny that you almost don't see it. It's known by the popular name of the decoy spider. You see one of its creations, a gigantic spider built by the tiny Cyclosa spider in order to scare off large predators. This is as amazing as it is creepy. A spider that uses the remains of other insects and dry leaves to create the image of a large spider on its web. If it fools predators, perfect! But to us humans, this work of art looks almost endearing. Who knew there were artists in the arachnid world? Near a small lake, you witness a unique scene. A large snake is slowly slithering its way toward a lizard that is resting on a rock. The lizard seems obvious to the presence of the dangerous reptile, but right as the snake is preparing to attack, the lizard flies the scene in its iconic way. The so-called basilisk lizard is famous for its ability to walk on water, or rather run across the water. This isn't an illusion, just a matter of balancing. The small lizard moves its legs on top of the water very fast, while its long tail serves as a counterweight. I wish I could do that. If you've ever wondered what a frog looks like on the inside, you've come to the right place. Right in front of your eyes, there is a rare local species of frog. It's known as the glass frog. This species of amphibian has a type of transparent skin that is completely see-through. In other words, you can see the frog's interior with astounding clarity. It's as if you had X-ray vision. Moving on with your journey, soon you come across a pond. Floating on its water is probably the biggest water lily you've ever seen in your life. These huge plants are also known as the Victoria Amazonica. They can measure up to 8 feet across and hold the weight of a grown-up person. but I wouldn't recommend trying to climb on it if I were you, just cause, it's the Amazon forest we're talking about. The wildlife here is amazing, but the forest itself is also a sight. There are over 80,000 species of plants and trees grown in the Amazon rainforest. In fact, you can find 10% of all the world's wildlife in this jungle. An estimated 400 billion trees grow on the gigantic area the forest occupies. Of course, this place is bound to be biodiverse, right? You won't be able to witness this phenomenon during your trip, but your guide tells you about a unique species of tree that is famous for being able to walk. Yep, you've heard correctly. There are walking trees in the Amazon rainforest. They don't have legs or anything like that, but they do move around in search of better lighting conditions. The Amazon canopy is so thick that only 1% of sunlight can reach the forest floor. Because of this, some trees end up getting less sunlight than others. The so-called walking palm trees seem to be adapted to this situation. They grow new roots, which helps them move for 1 to 2 inches per day. They can walk up to 65 feet per year. Maybe that's what inspired John Ronald Reuel Tolkien to create ants, huh? Those are pretty similar tree beings that roam freely around the world. I kid you not, it's not only wildlife that inhabits the Amazon. Actually, over 30 million people live in the forest. And there are also ancient settlements that scientists believe to have been thriving there. And I'm not talking about El Dorado, that's just a myth. But in 2018, a groundbreaking study showed that up to 1 million people probably inhabited the Amazon, between 1250 and 1500 CE. Can you imagine that? Working alongside local indigenous people, researchers from the University of Florida found several mounds in the Amazon. Besides these mounds, they also discovered interesting ditches and geoglyphs. After mapping all of these recurring mounds, scientists understood that this was a sign of an ancient settlement. They found remnants of carefully designed walls centered around plazas. This could only mean that these ancient cities were big and could host hundreds of thousands of people. These findings brought back the idea that the Amazon could have been home to thriving civilizations way before the Europeans arrived there. But rather than cities drenched in gold, they were simply well-developed agricultural societies.
Do you remember 2011? Well, play along with me. A diver is set to go deep into the waters of the Musi River, located in the heart of an Indonesian island. He is one among many who have been getting unbelievable artifacts from the bottom of the river. Little by little, divers and fishers discover a long-lost Sumatran civilization. Known as the Island of Gold, the kingdom of Shrivijaya was most likely the closest to a real-life El Dorado there has ever been. However, it disappeared late in the 13th century, and until recently, researchers didn't even know the exact location of the kingdom. Picture a civilization built on a river, a true water world, according to the archaeologists that have been studying Shrivijaya. Houses, markets, and places of worship were built on wooden piles above the level of the water. Citizens moved around like modern-day Venetians in simple boats. Shrivijaya was known to be a rich and important kingdom. It existed from the 7th to the 11th century CE. It was part of the Silk Road, and anyone traveling from east to west had to pass through the city. Their kings were smart and gained control of the Malacca Strait, which allowed the town to have total control over trading routes in the region. If anything, they sure were honoring the town's name. Shrivijaya translates from Sanskrit into prosperous victor, or simply glorious. The kingdom was an important commercial outpost of ancient times. It was strategically located among the most influential commercial routes of the ancient world, which means its citizens became extremely rich. Ancient wealthy societies used to overly display their gold and precious metals. They would often use these metals as offerings to their deities, or they would use them to forge large statues and to make jewelry for kings and queens and decorations for their palaces. Shrivijaya wasn't different. Local Indonesian divers who have been exploring the half-mile of the Musi River near the city of Palembang have found some evidence. So far, they've discovered a life-size statue of Buddha, jewelry studded with precious gems, temple bells, mirrors, golden jugs, and other items. No official archaeological excavations have been done in the area, so these artifacts are the first items of the Shrivijaya Empire ever found. Sean Kinslett, a British maritime archaeologist who has reported on these discoveries, says he is truly surprised. For long, people have been speculating about the true wealth of Shrivijaya, and it seems that the rumors have been confirmed. We're starting from ground zero, he says. We don't know what clothes the people of Shrivijaya wore, what their tastes were, what kinds of ceramics they like to eat off. Even though this discovery has brought excitement to the scientific community, there is a downside. Divers and fishers sell the retrieved artifacts at the International Antiquities Market before archaeologists can take a look at them. Researchers could try to buy some items, but they're sold for millions of dollars worldwide. Most of the information we know about this El Dorado of the East was learned from merchant accounts of the city. These descriptions say Shrivijaya was a kingdom of human-eating snakes and multilingual parrots. That's weird. Some say its active volcanoes gave the town an eerie and enigmatic sight, and all stories emphasize the amount of gold available there. Travel reports were a common way to describe cities in ancient times. In case you didn't know, this is how the legend of El Dorado originally began. As European explorers began their excavations in South American lands back in the 1500s, the word got out that an Amazonian civilization used to paint their leader in gold as an offering to higher powers. The legend of El Hombre Dorado, also known as the Golden Man, began to quickly spread around Europe. It turned out that it was only a ceremonial piece of pre-Columbian civilization. It had nothing to do with the land of infinite gold. Now, no one knows what brought about the decline of the Shrivijaya Empire. Some speculate that its active volcanoes could have swallowed it, or maybe wooden houses built above the river eventually sank. Maybe if divers keep retrieving lost items from the bottom of the river, archaeologists will be able to figure out what happened to the city. It seems to be quite common in the history of the world. Some ancient civilizations disappeared without a trace, as happened with the Mayan civilization, for example. The Mayans managed to build one of the biggest empires in pre-Columbian America. It was believed to be home to over 2 million people, and it thrived for over 6 centuries. Its sudden demise is something that bothers archaeologists and scientists alike. The Mayans began to settle in South America as early as 1500 BCE. Their civilization spanned Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize. They are believed to have built around 40 cities at the height of their empire. They also developed a complex hieroglyph system that has been studied since it was discovered by modern scientists. The Mayans were keen engineers, astronomers, and farmers. They were post-nomadic people that settled in vast areas of farmland where they could grow corn and other types of vegetables. Archaeologists are still learning a lot about the Mayan civilization by examining their ruins. The city of Chichen Itza, located in the Yucatan Peninsula, is one of the most important Mayan sites on Earth today. The site is made up of a total of 26 ruins, and it is home to a world-famous pyramid known as El Castillo. It consists of a series of square terraces with stairways on each of the 4 sides of the temple. It was built as an homage to a feathered serpent deity. The Mayans were such architectural geniuses that they managed to build a pyramid that cast a particular shadow. More specifically, in the late afternoon during the spring and fall equinoxes, the pyramid casts several triangular shadows that create the illusion of a feathered serpent crawling down the pyramid. And they created this with none of the tech we have today. The city is so amazing that since 2007, it has been considered one of the 7 wonders of the New World. The Mayan Empire thrived for over 6 centuries due to their wise resource management system and astronomical knowledge. They were able to accurately predict eclipses and, using their rudimentary technology, could even locate Venus and Mars. They had everything to thrive for much longer than they actually did. This is why the Mayans' fall intrigues modern scientists so much. No one has been able to understand completely what led to their demise. That is, until a recent discovery. A study done by NASA claims it can explain what might have happened. Scientists have uncovered a sample of pollen trapped for over 1,200 years in ancient layers of lake sediment, which dates back to the time just before the collapse of the civilization. The analysis has revealed something completely new about the Mayans. Instead of the suspected claims that the Mayans disappeared due to terrible disease or some extended conflict in the region, it could have happened due to deforestation. Perhaps to build their entire empire, they had to cut a lot of trees. Without trees, their soil could have eroded, and all their fertile lands could have slowly and gradually become barren. According to NASA scientists, the temperatures in the region could have risen by about 6 degrees, and from that point on, the land would have become even drier and crops more difficult to grow. Basically, NASA says that the Mayans couldn't do the sole thing that made them thrive, which was agriculture, and their kingdom began to decline. Oh yeah, and this theory was supported by yet another find. Archaeologists found skeletons from the time of the empire. Those had prominent signs of malnutrition. This theory might really shed new light on Mayan history. It could explain what brought down such a powerful civilization. So, what do you say? Which theory is true? Have we actually managed to find out the reason for the fall of the Mayan Empire?
A girl, once and beautiful, ended up in a grave with a huge sickle across her neck. There were no signs of violence, no indications of any actual crime. Yet, someone was clearly terrified when they forced her into that grave. So scared that they even placed a padlock on the big toe of her left foot. They wanted her to stay in the tomb once and for all, fearing she might rise and take revenge on them. So, a whole community turned against a young lady who wasn't even over 20 years old, deeming her to be of ultimate danger. Do you see what I'm driving at? Let's test your historical knowledge. Who has been feared throughout human history to such an extent that commoners couldn't shake off that lingering sense of dread, even after their passing? If you say witches, warlocks, and vampires, you'd be completely correct. Just a little hint here. If you can't overpower someone physically, you can do it supernaturally. Well, that's at least what people used to think back in the 17th century. Not only was there a sickle and a padlock, but there were also signs of an attempt to twist the girl's corpse in the grave and turn it face down. This attempt had failed, leaving her spine buckled and twisted. By the way, the padlock wasn't necessarily meant to lock a vampire. It was more likely a talisman against evil spirits. That's a peculiar and, let's face it, very cruel way to bury someone. Yet it was a common practice for creating anti-vampire burial sites. The methods for preventing vampires from rising were quite elaborate. First off, let me introduce a term. Anti-vampire graves, known as revenant graves, date back thousands of years and have been found in various locations across Europe. Europe, you heard that right. Now before you say, hey, vampires are a Romanian thing, Dracula, duh, let me convince you otherwise. They are a part of all European folklore, meaning you can find references to them throughout Europe. With new settlements in America, vampire lore spread there too, eventually turning into the Twilight Saga. These anti-vampire burials are characterized by evidence of precautions taken to prevent those who bit the dust from rising. Such measures could include placing large stones on the deceased's legs or even piercing the body with a lance to fix it to the ground. To be completely safe, they could also consider removing the head from the torso. So, burying the body face down, cutting off the head, and pressing the body with a stone were the methods used to keep someone believed to be a demonic being from leaving the grave. Let's return to the poor lady, or rather, the girl. A couple of archaeologists, Dariusz Poliński and his partner, Magna Durodzka, who happened to be partners in both crime and life, stumbled upon her grave. Strangely, all of her 206 bones remained untouched. Yet no gravestone, no name, nothing. Just a lonely grave on a hill in northern Poland. Poliński, a professor of archaeology and Zagrodska began piecing together the story of the woman they eventually named Zosia. Carbon dating suggested she had been about 18 years old and had passed away about 350 years ago during a chaotic time in Poland's history. There is little documentation about this graveyard, which seemed to serve as a resting place for individuals marginalized by the community. Was Zosia a poor girl who had been marginalized because life forced her into the worst situation a lady could face? Not really. As the archaeologists delved deeper, they stumbled upon some hints that indicated she might have hailed from a rich family. Her burial featured a stylish bonnet, and the delicate silk along with shiny silver and gold threads found with it suggested that it was part of an elegant headdress. This all pointed to the idea that she had some serious status or wealth. But the way she was buried indicated her outsider status in the village of Pien. Perhaps her presence there was unwanted, hence the idea of her being a vampire, backed up by the manner in which she was forced into the grave and held there. By analyzing the structure of her skull and extricating DNA from her skeleton, scientists created a reconstruction of what her face might have looked like. The specialists meticulously reshaped Zosia's likeness using modeling clay on a 3D printed model of her skull, which proved to be a deeply moving experience. They remarked that while they often worked on face reconstructions, in this case, they also sought to restore her dignity. Utilizing these three methods, the team reconstructed Zosia's 400-year-old face, revealing the human story buried beneath supernatural beliefs. It's ironic, isn't it? First, people tried their hardest to make the world forget her face and prevent her from ever coming back. 400 years later, people did everything they could to bring her back to life. Her picture now is all over the internet, yet we will never see the faces of those who buried her. Alas, this reconstruction project only allows viewers to visually connect with Zosia, but her true story remains a mystery. But what we know for sure is that people who were deemed vampires were badly discriminated against, to say the least. Rumor had it that hungry vampires would even steal people to quench their thirst. Let's use math to prove this rumor wrong and prove that Zosia wasn't one of them. Back in the year 1600, there were only 537 million people worldwide. Yeah, this data may not be very accurate, but it's pretty close to reality. A physicist, Kostas Eftimiou, calculated that if a vampire had been drinking one person's blood each month, humanity would have faced extinction within a few years. Starting with one vampire and a population of 537 million in 1600, this math shows we'd have no humans left by July 1602. But here we are now. Well, while placing a stone on a corpse to make sure the vampire doesn't rise may be something new to you, there are also a bunch of stereotypical things associated with these creatures that you definitely know, such as garlic and mirrors. Funnily enough, even though it's all based on a bunch of superstitions, there's pretty good logic behind the garlic thing. You see, it contains a special compound called allicin, which is a powerful antibiotic. While people back then couldn't know what an antibiotic was, they noticed garlic was pretty effective against various conditions. Since they believed vampires were created by a particular blood condition, they also believed garlic could defeat a vampire. And there's more. There's actually a blood condition called porphyria, which makes people look like real vampires. Their skin is pale and their teeth get bigger as their gums shrink. And guess what? People who have porphyria cannot consume garlic, as it worsens their condition. Wow, that's a cool coincidence. The next superstition is a bit fresher, and it's about vampires avoiding mirrors. The first known reference to the mirrors comes from the book Dracula in 1897. But why wouldn't a vampire show a reflection? Simple. Before the plastic era we live in, mirrors were traditionally backed with silver. Silver was commonly believed to repel evil spirits, possibly because it has antimicrobial properties. Much like garlic, its healing properties may be what was supposed to scare off a vampire. Another reason why suspected vampires may have avoided mirrors is the changes to their appearance from conditions commonly confused with vampirism, like porphyria and rabies. People afflicted with these conditions may have avoided looking in mirrors for that reason. causing others to assume that vampires avoided mirrors. But if you ever met a vampire and these methods don't repel it, I have one more trick for you. Ask the potential vampire to count. It can be spilled grains, seeds, or even the holes in the fishing net if you happen to have one. Vampires are into math, so they'll stop to count, delaying them until sunrise. And we all know that vampires don't do well in sunlight. Ironically, it's Count Von Count, a vampire who teaches us how to count on Sesame Street.
Unlike many other ancient Egyptian burial grounds, King Tutankhamun's tomb stayed hidden and free of unwanted thieves for 3,000 years. One reason was that the tomb was smaller than average and tucked away in a place called the Valley of the Kings. This area was already being extensively explored by the time they stumbled upon Tut's spot. The entrance was all covered in debris from building a nearby tomb, which must have also helped keep it a secret. There were also zero writings or signs on the outside of the tomb. Time passing also played a part in keeping it in amazing shape until the 1920s, when a man named Howard Carter finally made it in. But was Carter that big of a hero? Some recent findings say he might have been sneakier than initially thought. People used to think Carter wasn't just a glorified treasure hunter, he was a true archaeologist. Before Tut, he had been on a relentless quest for Egyptian artifacts. He discovered his interest in these unusual objects when he was a child, and soon started drawing the sculptures and inscriptions that were found in ancient tombs. After stumbling upon the remains of King Tut, Carter spent a decade recording and processing all sorts of objects, like golden thrones, chariots, and statues from Tut's tomb, shipping them down the Nile to Egypt's museum in Cairo. Well, at least that was the official story. More recent discoveries claim that not all of the objects made it to Egyptian officials. A secret letter seems to uncover Carter's little 10 for them, 1 for me policy. The letter in question was sent to Sir Alan Gardiner, a philologist and friend of Carter's, dated from 1922. In these writings, Carter mentioned having found the tomb and was asking his buddy for some advice. In another letter from 1934, Gardiner seems to be thanking Carter for an amulet, which was sent to him as a thank you gift. Carter was adamant that it didn't come from Tut's tomb, but evidently it did. Even the British director of the Egyptian Museum was onto Carter's sneaky endeavors, but couldn't prove it. He compared Gardiner's amulet to others from Tut's tomb, and lo and behold, they were a perfect match. Gardiner was so disappointed to have been put in such a sticky situation that he vented to Carter in another letter. Deciding to be a good friend, Gardiner didn't throw the famous archaeologist under the bus. Instead, he advised Carter to take those stolen goods back to Cairo, just like he'd advise you to like this video and subscribe to the Brightside channel for more amazing videos on the most unique topics in history. It's not the only shady piece of information on Carter's post-discovery behavior. In 1947, a man named Alfred Lucas, who used to work with a controversial archaeologist, gave some information in an obscure journal in Cairo. He claimed that Carter sneakily cracked open the burial chamber door himself. Then he sealed it back up like nothing had happened before the official uncovering. Now, why would he do that? Well, the same theory suggests that Carter and his crew might have entered the tomb early so they could get their hands on some ancient goodies. Obviously, these people couldn't risk having such objects sold while they were still alive, but made sure they were auctioned off after they passed. Carter, though, never confessed to anything. He made no official denial either, but the Egyptian government couldn't risk any more mysterious disappearances, so they prohibited him from entering the tomb for a while. Some have connected this apparent stealing to the curse of King Tut. If you've never heard of it, know that it became quite the scary tale soon after King Tutankhamun's resting place was uncovered. It claimed that anyone messing with the tomb of the boy pharaoh would face some serious bad luck. It's not all dramatic like a mummy going on an aggressive spree, but word got out that the people involved in disturbing King Tut's lair met some mysterious, untimely ends. The main untimely passing related to this supposed curse is that of George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. He was this British aristocrat who helped fund the search for the tomb. He passed away just a year after the tomb was opened. Now, people love to call it mysterious, but it turns out that Herbert was already in pretty bad shape health-wise when he got to Cairo, and he ended up getting taken down by a regular disease. Now, let's talk numbers. There were a lot of people linked to this tomb opening: security guards, archaeologists, and supporting staff. And sure, a few of them did pass not long after the tomb started receiving visitors. As much as we'd like this curse to be true for the sake of, good storytelling, statistically, if you have a bunch of people connected to opening a tomb, you'd expect some passings just by random chance. The average lifespan for those supposedly targeted by the ancient curse was more than 20 years after the spell was supposed to kick in. Herbert's daughter even lived until the 1980s, that's half a century later. And Howard Carter himself lived until 1935, a solid 16 years after the big reveal. Some have suggested that the whole curse was nothing more than a careful PR strategy. You see, when Tut's tomb was found, Howard Carter wanted to make a priority out of keeping nosy reporters away. So he might have come up with a curse hanging over anyone entering the boy king's resting place. But what was stolen from King Tut's tomb anyway? Well, some jewelry to begin with. It might have been snatched by Howard Carter himself, according to a French specialist. He did some intensive research by looking at old pictures taken from inside the tomb back in the 1920s. He compared those images to various objects from museums and auction houses. He soon started to piece together the whereabouts of some of Tut's jewelry. First up, there's this collar that used to be on Tut's chest. It was all broken into pieces, and some parts went via Carter to the Nelson Atkins Museum in Missouri. Meanwhile, other bits ended up on a necklace owned by some unnamed people who tried to sell it in 2015 but failed. Even the Nelson Atkins Museum agrees, as they've confirmed the information on their website. Then there's a headdress piece. Some beads from it that once belonged to Tut apparently got stolen by Carter too. They were also strung into a necklace and are now being held at the St. Louis Art Museum. Another fancy collar made out of glazed ceramic magic spent some time at the Met, far away in New York. Thankfully, it was sent back to Egypt a bit over a decade ago. This seems to have been, as you'd expect by now, also stolen by Carter. Missing artifacts aside, King Tut still gave a ton of amazing objects that helped us learn more about this incredible ancient culture. Starting with the famous burial mask. It's this massive 21-inch gold art piece with semi-precious stones and glass paste. It weighs 22 pounds and showcases the boy pharaoh with a long beard and a headdress with a cobra and vulture. On the back, there's this spell from an important ancient Egyptian spiritual book that's supposed to make sure it works just as well in the afterlife. Tut was also apparently a board game enthusiast. They found 4 board games in his tomb, some made of ivory. Archaeologists also found a pair of gold sandals, though you'd imagine they were more for show than for comfort. In fact, the pharaoh probably never wore them in his lifetime. Now, speaking of fashion items, it turns out Tut was quite the fancy ruler. They even found a mannequin in his tomb that was used to pick out, adjust, and store his outfits and jewelry. The boy king seemed to have also enjoyed some music, based on the 2 trumpets historians found in his tomb. Though they were played back in 1935 in a BBC broadcast, the instruments are today considered too fragile to be maneuvered.
Imagine you've booked a tour through the jungles of Costa Rica. All of a sudden, you stumble upon a huge stone sphere, nearly the length of a king-sized bed in diameter. How on earth did it end up there? And what does it symbolize? You immediately ask your guide. He's not as amazed as you are, and tells you that there are actually several hundreds of them scattered across the south of the country. The mysterious stone spheres don't have an official name. The locals simply call them las bolas, which means balls in Spanish. while historians refer to them as Diquis spheres, after the culture that produced them. Scientists have studied the sediment layers of the Earth around them and estimate that the earliest were made around the year 600 CE, and the newest ones date to the year 1000 CE. Many of the spheres were relocated after their initial discovery, and that's why archaeologists can't date them precisely. The Diquis culture completely disappeared shortly after they were discovered by the Spanish in the 16th century. Unlike the Mayas and the Aztecs, the myths or legends of these peoples didn't survive, so they cannot explain the existence of the mysterious orbs. More than 300 of these objects have been discovered so far, with some being smaller than 1 inch in diameter, and the largest measures 6.6 feet in diameter, standing taller than most humans. Although there are ones made from limestone, most spheres were carved out of a coarse version of basalt, a type of rock that forms when lava cools rapidly. Some orbs weigh up to 15 tons, and in most cases, their surface is smooth to the touch, although there are coarse, mostly unfinished pieces. If we throw away the theory that river erosion naturally sculpted the spheres, the ancient people seem to have created them by hammering boulders with other rocks. Once they got the rough shape they were aiming for, they would polish the rock to perfection, using techniques such as controlled fracture and grinding. The mysterious spheres are located in the Diquis Delta, on the coast of the Pacific Ocean. Most of them can be found in a place called Farm 6, which, alongside 3 other sites, was proclaimed a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2014. The area contains other finds from the pre-Columbian era, such as paved areas, burial sites, and mounds. For centuries, the stone balls were hidden under a thick layer of sediment that protected them against the elements and looters until they were unearthed during the 1930s. The company that owned the land was clearing the rainforest for banana plantations when they stumbled upon these unusual stone constructions. Some were damaged by bulldozers, and some by workers trying to pry them open, as they believed there was gold hidden inside. It took a while before the authorities intervened to stop further damage to the finds. Doris Stone, the daughter of an executive of the company that owned the land, was the first to study the spheres. In 1943, she published an article in a leading American archaeological journal, turning the world's attention to the orbs. Expeditions soon followed, and archaeologists were immediately able to determine that the stone formations were human-made, probably created by the ancient indigenous population of Costa Rica. To this day, no one has been able to fully explain their function in a scientific way. It means there's still room for some wild theories about the sphere's origins and true purpose. The most popular theory in the scientific community is that the stone spheres served as decorations and status symbols, as many of them were found near the houses of chieftains. Local tribal leaders were also laid to rest with some of the smaller balls, so these stone formations were definitely associated with power in some way. Chiseling a boulder to perfection involved a lot of labor and planning, and only powerful individuals could afford it at the time. The other popular theory is that the boulders were used for astronomical observations. Individual spheres represented stars or planets, like a primitive map of the night sky. Since they were perfectly round, it was easy to roll them around. Before the jungle engulfed them, the area where they were found was a flat alluvial plain, ideal for rolling large boulders around. Another version of this theory suggests that the stones were used as boundary markers, much like modern border stones, which are also mostly made from stone. Finally, legends from other tribes that lived in the area tell of how the spheres were cannonballs that the deity of thunder used to drive away the deity of winds and hurricanes. We still don't know the original purpose of the Costa Rican spheres, but they remain an important part of the country's national identity. The National Museum in the Costa Rican capital, San Jose, has 6 of them in its courtyard. Many other spheres have become prized garden decorations for wealthy Costa Ricans. There's even one at Harvard University. More than a millennium after they were created, the mysterious stone spheres of Costa Rica are still associated with power and wealth. In terms of numbers, the stone orbs are not perfectly round. They are rated as nearly perfect, at 96% spherical in shape. And while even that is pretty impressive, the spheres of Costa Rica are not the only ones of their kind. Nearly a decade ago, workers came across mysterious giant stone spheres deep underground in a coal mine in northern Asia. The surface of the spheres, which measured a little over the length of a human footstep in diameter, was unusually smooth, and people tried to explain it somehow. Some were certain they were out of this world, and others suggested the spheres were actually petrified dinosaur eggs. Scientists quickly put an end to further discussion, as it turned out that the mysterious spheres were concretions. Those are rock formations that take millions of years to form deep underground. Think of a pebble that picks up snow as it rolls down a hill. That's how concretions are made. Groundwater, rich in sediment and minerals, flows around the sediment, slowly shaping it into a perfect orb. The process is quite common in nature, but most concretions are fairly small. The spheres found in the coal mine grew to their size in the mineral-rich ground, and they were big enough to get the press and the general public interested. Another possible case of concretions is the massive stone spheres found in the Visoko Valley in Bosnia. Samir Osmanagic, better known as the Bosnian Indiana Jones, was the first to explore those objects about as wide as the length of a London bus. He believes the stone spheres were carved by a lost civilization that lived in the area 1,000 years ago. The reddish color of the orbs, though, is proof to geologists that they are indeed concretions, rich in iron content. The Moki marbles, found in rural Utah, are similar in color to the Bosnian spheres. These tiny concretions are the size of toy marbles and consist of a sandstone core and a shell made out of hematite, an iron ore. In South Africa, miners have come across Klerksdorp spheres, which are similar in shape and size to Moki marbles. The only difference is that these ones formed inside volcanic sediments and ash. The most intriguing among human-made tiny spheres are probably the orbs found on several Greek islands. Scientists discovered 700 stones smaller than golf balls near the Bronze Age site of Akrotiri on the island of Santorini. They believe that the finds were between 3,600 and 4,500 years old. When they compared all the stones' variations in size and color, the archaeologists concluded that these enigmatic stones could have easily been the oldest board game ever made. With the help of artificial intelligence, scientists are now trying to work out the rules of this game.
In 2011, scientists from Chile found a weird-looking fossil in Antarctica that looked like a squashed football. Almost 10 years later, the rock just sat on a shelf in Chile's National Museum of Natural History with no specific label. It went by The Thing in the museum because it looked like something from a science fiction movie. When the scientists finally got their hands on the strange fossil, it turned out it was actually a giant softshell egg from around 66 million years ago. This one is more than 11 inches long and 7 inches wide. A regular chicken egg is just 2.5 inches long, and an ostrich egg is almost 6 inches long for comparison. So, the Thing won the title of the biggest softshell egg ever found and the second largest egg of any animal we know of. The only bigger egg that was ever found was that of the extinct Madagascan elephant bird, which is also 1.5 times as tall as Michael Jordan. The bird, not the egg. The Antarctic egg is also special because it's the first fossil ever found in this part of the world. So, whoever left it there must have been one big creature, probably a giant sea turtle that lived long ago, like a mosasaur. This is surprising because most scientists thought these creatures didn't even lay eggs. So this discovery could change what we know about them. The egg is also unique because it has a thin eggshell and no pores, which is totally different from most dinosaur eggs. It actually looks more like the eggs of lizards and snakes, but it came from a giant creature related to these animals. No known dinosaurs or flying reptiles from that time and place were big enough to lay such a huge egg, so it must have been a mosasaur after all. But we can't be 100% sure. Scientists did a lot of work and studied 259 types of living reptiles, like lizards and snakes, and their eggs. From this, they figured out that the mommy who laid the egg was probably at least 23 feet long, not counting her tail. During the late Cretaceous period, this part of Antarctica might have been like a nursery. Paleontologists have found bones of tiny mosasaurs and plesiosaurs in the same area, along with bones from the grown-up ones. Archaeologists in Norway made another cool but literally discovery and found dozens of arrows that had been hidden in ice for 6,000 years. They were melting out of a large ice patch in the high mountains, covering an area of about 45 football fields. In 2014 and 2016, when the summers were extra warm, scientists went to an ice patch called Langfoni to look around. They also found lots of reindeer bones and antlers there. Some of the arrows were whole and some in pieces, along with 5 arrowheads around the melting ice patch. This is more arrows than have been found at any other frozen site in the world. Some of the 68 found arrows date back to the Neolithic period, and the newest ones are from the 14th century of the Common Era. Ice is like the perfect time machine that can preserve whatever ends up there in an almost perfect condition. Langfoni became famous as one of the first ice patch sites after a local hiker found a 3,300-year-old leather shoe right next to its edge. Scientists are studying places like this to understand how people used these sites and how the ice patches from Norway to North America changed over time. Now, once upon a time, around 32,000 years ago, to be exact, a squirrel buried some seeds near a river in Siberia. Am I the only one getting the Ice Age vibes? Anyway, these seeds belong to a plant with cute white flowers. Thousands of years later, a group of scientists found these seeds buried deep in the frozen ground, about as far down as a 12-story building is tall. The seeds were surrounded by ice and bones of animals like mammoths, bison, and woolly rhinoceroses. The mature seeds had been damaged, maybe by some squirrel, but some of the younger seeds still had good plant parts inside them. The scientists carefully took those out and put them in small containers to help them grow. And here comes the coolest part. They were able to grow the plants. Their flowers were shaped a little differently from the flowers of the same plant that grows today. After a year, the Ice Age plant even made new seeds. Based on this, the scientists suggested that permafrost could be a depository for an ancient gene pool, and we could find extinct species there and bring them back to life. Scientists on an icebreaker in Antarctica were looking for whales, but found something way more unusual. The camera behind the ship, which is as heavy as a car, detected 16 million icefish nests on the floor of the Weddell Sea. The nests were located about every 10 inches in all directions and covered an area of 93 square miles, which is slightly bigger than the whole of Washington, D.C. The colony even had a distinct border, which was a line in the sand. The scientists were in the area because they were studying a special spot in the ocean where the water was a little warmer than the water around it. In this warmer water, they found tiny animals called zooplankton near the top. When the young icefish hatch, they swim up to this area to eat the zooplankton before going back down to the seafloor to grow up and have their own offspring. Since there was so much food, it made sense to see icefish in this warm water. But they didn't expect to find such a huge number of icefish nests, much more than anyone had ever seen before. New Zealand's Antarctic Heritage Fund found some old photo negatives in a hut in Antarctica. They turned out to be unique images from the Ross Sea Party. It was a famous failed expedition led by Ernest Shackleton. He wanted to become the first person to cross Antarctica by land, from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea, passing through the South Pole. But things went wrong when their ship, the Aurora, was blown out to sea. They had to use the hut from another explorer, Captain Robert Falcon Scott. His goal was to be the first person to reach the North Pole, but sadly, he didn't succeed either. The negatives were made of cellulose nitrate and were found stuck together in the small box. The Trust took the negatives back to New Zealand, where they carefully separated them and discovered 22 hidden images. Many of the photos were damaged, but the Trust could still recognize some familiar places around McMurdo Sound, a well-known area in Antarctica. No one knows for sure who took the pictures. In December 2021, some scientists noticed a strange mark on the Larsen ice shelf, a giant sheet of ice off the eastern coast of Antarctica. They thought it might be a river flowing under the ice, so they drilled down over 1,600 feet to check it out. They expected to find water, but they didn't expect to see that the water was full of fast-moving creatures called amphipods. The scientists also found that the water in the underground river had unusual layers of currents moving in different directions, which they still don't fully understand. Another surprising thing happened during their research. On December 20th of the same year, a volcano erupted far away in Tonga, and the pressure waves from the eruption were detected all the way down in the ice river in Antarctica. It shows how everything on our planet is connected, even in the most distant places. For more than 3,000 years, the gold mask of Pharaoh Tutankhamun stayed hidden in the Valley of the Kings. This artifact, which stands about 21 inches tall, shows how skilled and artistic the ancient Egyptians were. But nobody expected that X-rays would reveal its biggest secret. King Tut was the last ruler of his family during the 18th dynasty. He took the throne at just 9 years old, but ruled for only 10 years before he passed away unexpectedly. If we're being honest, back in ancient Egypt, he was mostly forgotten by the rulers who came after him. His tomb wasn't a big deal for them, so much so that even the grave robbers forgot about him. It might sound a bit sad, but the truth is that it was actually great news for us. Since his tomb was practically forgotten, it ended up being perfectly preserved. While the other tombs in the Valley of the Kings were looted, his remained sealed and untouched. So when it was discovered back in 1922, it had over 5,000 precious objects inside. That made Tutankhamun basically an instant celebrity and one of the best-known pharaohs nowadays. Among the treasures was the most stunning piece, his golden mask. This mask is said to be an exact image of the king's face, or at least it was supposed to be, but we'll get to that later. The purpose of this accurate representation of his face was to make sure that his soul would recognize him in the afterlife and return to his mummified body. In ancient Egyptian beliefs, this would allow him to continue living in the afterlife. The details of the mask clearly looked incredibly difficult to create, but people didn't realize how complex it truly was until many years later. The first X-rays of the mask were taken in 1967. Back then, the main reason for these scans was practical – conservation. The mask was heading to Paris for an exhibition, and it was the first time it had ever left Paris. This would help them keep track of any changes during the exhibit. Plus, the images could give clues about how the mask was made, but back then, they probably didn't fully realize just how complex its construction was. I mean, Egyptian goldsmiths didn't use modern soldering techniques. So, how did they make this mask? New X-rays taken in 2007 gave us some answers. It turned out the Egyptians didn't use pure gold, which is 24 carats. The mask was actually made of 23-karat gold, meaning it was mixed with another material. So specialists discovered that the gold sheets contained a small amount of copper, a reddish-brown metal. This was likely done to make the material more flexible and easier to shape. They would then shape the gold sheets by heating and hammering them over and over again. But there was one more secret inside the mask that wasn't discovered until 2015. The year before, the staff at Cairo's Egyptian Museum were working on the mask display when the long beard of the mask accidentally got knocked off. Another theory is that the beard had become loose over time and just fell off. Either way, the fact that King Tut's beard came off caused a lot of stress. After all, we're talking about one of Cairo's biggest tourist attractions, so the experts had to fix the problem quickly. The restoration process started with a detailed recording of the mask's condition. To do this, they had to take a full three-dimensional scan of the artifact, and, by accident, they found something very interesting in the mask. Inside the royal beard, there is a gold tube, an intriguing structure that the Egyptians likely used to attach the beard to the rest of the mask. And that proved, once again, that the process of making this mask was even more complex than experts thought. But the mysteries don't stop there. Remember how we mentioned that the mask was thought to perfectly represent King Tutankhamun's face? Well, that might not be entirely true. Some popular theories suggest the mask was never meant for him and was actually made for someone else. A study published in 2015 suggested the mask was originally made for a female pharaoh, his supposed stepmother, the famous and beautiful Egyptian queen Nefertiti. The biggest clue comes from an inscription on the mask. At first glance, it seemed to belong to Tutankhamun, but after a close examination, researchers noted that something else was actually written underneath King Tut's name. The royal name stamp seems to have been altered, and originally it had something written on it that translates to Queen Nefertiti. There is another feature of King Tut's golden mask that was overlooked for years, which adds even more mystery. As we mentioned earlier, experts believe he wasn't respected much by the pharaohs who came after him, and one of the clues that made archaeologists think this is the pierced ears on the mask. Some researchers believe that King Tutankhamun wouldn't have worn earrings after he was a kid. So, according to their theory, by the time he passed away at 18, he shouldn't have been represented with pierced ears. This could also support the idea that the mask originally belonged to Nefertiti, or maybe to someone who wasn't even connected to King Tut. But the mask isn't the only source of mystery. In fact, his whole tomb is full of puzzles. Recently, historians found a sign that the place where King Tut was supposed to be buried was changed at the last minute. For years, experts wonder why a pharaoh who ruled for 9 years ended up in such a simple tomb. When compared to the grandeur of other pharaohs' tombs, his tomb seemed, well, a bit plain. The idea that a king like Tutankhamun would have such an unremarkable resting place just doesn't match up with the power and importance he must have had in ancient Egypt. So, what happened? Well, apparently, this might have something to do with his successor, Pharaoh I. After King Tutankhamun passed away, researchers believe that I made sure to erase him from Egypt's history. So, one theory suggests that he was probably behind the quick decision to place King Tut's body in a smaller, less impressive tomb. When experts looked at I's own tomb, they found something interesting. There is a large wall covered in painted baboons. This is the same type of artwork found in Tutankhamun's tomb. It seems like the same person might have chosen the artwork for both tombs. Now, the design and decoration of the two tombs are almost identical, suggesting there was a shared hand behind both. But there is one key difference. I's tomb is fit for a king. It's much bigger and more impressive, even though the style and artwork are similar to what you see in Tutankhamun's tomb. So the theory suggests that I decided what went into both tombs. Since Tut passed away unexpectedly at a young age, his grand tomb wasn't finished in time. Normally, pharaohs start building their tombs while they're still alive to make sure everything is perfect. But Tut passed away when he was just 18, so there wasn't enough time. I may have taken advantage of the situation, ordering a smaller tomb for Tut and keeping a larger one for himself. Experts believe this theory explains why Tutankhamun's tomb is so simple and how I managed to wipe his memory from history so easily. But in the end, the story of King Tut's mask and tomb is full of mystery and intrigue. Each new discovery sheds more light on what really happened all those years ago. But one thing is for sure, the secrets of ancient Egypt still have much to reveal, and King Tutankhamun will continue to fascinate people for years to come. If you come across a well in Portugal, resist the temptation to gaze into its depths. The inverted tower in the enigmatic city of Sintra sends chills through those who encounter it as it spirals down a daunting 88 feet into the underground. It certainly wasn't designed to collect water, yet its true purpose remains a closely guarded secret. Dating back to around 1904, this well could have been involved in a mysterious initiation tradition from the Knights Templar. The Templars had faded into history almost 6 centuries before the construction of this pit, but their enigmatic traditions were revived by later generations. So one theory says that candidates seeking to join the group back then had to confront their deepest fears by facing this well, descending its spiral staircase blindfolded. When they reached the bottom of the inverted tower, they removed their blindfolds and were faced with this frightening sight. The only way out of this dark labyrinth was to keep looking up and following the light. Now imagine yourself browsing the shelves of a used bookstore until you find a book with an alphabet you've never seen before. You decide to use an image translation app but find no matches. Intrigued, you buy the book. Then you show it to your friends and family, but nobody recognizes that alphabet. Rare book dealer Winfried Vonnig probably experienced the same frustration back in 1912 when he acquired what would later become the most enigmatic book in the world. The work is known today as the Voynich manuscript, and it's written entirely in an unknown language that no one has deciphered yet. The pages of this 15th century codex are filled with botanical drawings, but these aren't typical daisies or roses. In fact, they don't resemble any plant species that we know of. What makes things even stranger is the illustrations of unfamiliar constellations and women swimming in green baths. Delving deeper into the realm of mysterious texts, we set off on a journey to the Qumran Caves near the Salt Sea in the Middle East. In 1952, a team of archaeologists stumbled upon 2 scrolls made of highly oxidized copper at the site. Unrolling them was a major challenge, so they decided to cut the scrolls into 23 parts to investigate them. Imagine their surprise to see Hebrew words like gold and silver popping up. But no, it wasn't an ancient invoice. It was more like a treasure map, pointing the way to over $1 million. Unfortunately, the treasure was never found. Not for lack of trying, though. You see, the quest isn't as easy as it may appear. Some of the copper scroll's vocabulary is technical, and some geographical locations remain a mystery. There's also one last possibility. Perhaps it's all a work of fiction, like a pirate tale from the old days. People talk about Mona Lisa's almost haunting stare that seems to follow you no matter where you stand. But here's a quick question. Does she have eyebrows? You got it right if you said no, and her complete lack of eyebrows adds another layer of mystique to her gaze. The most common explanation is that beauty standards were different, and perhaps plucking the hairs above the eyes was a thing around 1503. But take a look at other Italian paintings from that time, like La Schiavona or Portrait of a Young Girl. Yep, eyebrows. So, not everyone was entirely pleased with this theory, like French inventor Pascal Cotte. He spent 3,000 hours analyzing scans of the painting to dig through all the layers of Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece. Now he claims that the Mona Lisa once had eyebrows, but they disappeared over time due to cleanings and restorations. Some historians, however, still question his findings, which means that Mona Lisa's style, or a lack of it, remains an unsolved mystery. So, you decide to travel to Rio de Janeiro, and everyone tells you that Sugarloaf Mountain is a must-see. When you spot the mountain from a distance, you realize that the stone has a cavity. But around noon, the whole view changes. The shadow in that cavity takes the shape of a bird, an ibis to be precise. A local legend links this bird shape to the ancient Egyptian deity Thoth, as if the ancient Egyptians once visited Rio de Janeiro and were somehow inspired by the natural phenomenon. But it's probably just a big coincidence. I mean, literally. The real mystery, however, lies in the waters around Sugarloaf Mountain. In the 80s, archaeologist Robert Marks got a tip from locals about a treasure hidden beneath Guanabara Bay. He dove in and found quite a few Roman amphorae, you know, those ancient vases with two handles. His discovery could potentially provide evidence of a Roman shipwreck that might have reached Brazil 17 centuries before the Portuguese even set foot there. However, he couldn't proceed with his research, and to this day, the idea of the Roman presence on Brazil's coast remains uncertain. The true location of Cleopatra's tomb isn't the only ancient Egyptian mystery. Many secrets are carved into the walls of ancient structures, like in the Temple of Seti I. Take a close look at this hieroglyph, and you'll notice that it resembles a modern-day helicopter. Look to the right, and you'll see an engraving that looks like a submarine. Odd, right? The most reasonable explanation for this has to do with the legacies of different rulers. When a new pharaoh came to power, they had their own hieroglyphs added over the original ones. But this is still a topic of debate, as some Egyptologists believe that these mysterious hieroglyphs may represent some kind of ancient technology. The same applies to the Dendera light. The image found in the underground passageway of the Hathor Temple is a subject of significant controversy in Egyptian history. Some researchers suggest that the inscription simply represents a rising sun, while others interpret it as evidence of some kind of modern lighting system. And it does indeed resemble Crookes' tube, one of the early experiments with electrical discharges. Although there's no concrete evidence of ancient Egyptians having modern electricity, some historians believe that this theory could help explain why many discovered tombs don't have any residues left behind from the use of oil lamps or candles. A lot has been said about the mysterious pyramids of Egypt, but many people tend to forget that other inexplicable structures had already existed even before them. Our next stop takes us to Turkey. The top of a hill known as Göbekli Tepe, near the city of Urfa, holds an ancient secret. It features more than 20 circular stone enclosures dated back over 11,000 years. Many of these have heavily carved stone T-shaped pillars adorned with eerie human figures with folded hands. The most accepted theory is that it's the world's first temple, likely used for rituals or social events. But the greatest mystery lies in how it was built, as this site existed before the domestication of animals or the use of metal tools. So the construction must have been very difficult, challenging our understanding of the historical timeline. Now, I hope you're not afraid of heights, because we're about to take a flight over the Nazca Lines. You've probably already heard about these massive, mysterious drawings etched into an arid region of Peru. They come in many different shapes, like a spider, a monkey, and even a Google-eyed ET that is probably just a fissure. Anyway, this story got some fresh chapters in 2022 when an additional 168 new drawings were discovered. The original ones could only be seen from the air, but these new ones are much smaller and can be observed from the ground. However, one thing they have in common is that their purpose remains totally unclear. Some might call them the largest-scale calendar in the world. Others suggest that they served as a tool for agricultural purposes. Of course, many theories have emerged in an attempt to give the Nazca Lines a meaning, but the truth is that they remain some of the most important unsolved mysteries in history.
What is a boat doing in the middle of a desert? You would expect to find a seagoing vessel closer to shore. This is the question archaeologists had been asking for decades. In 1988, there was a storm near one of the most important archaeological sites in ancient Egypt. A wooden structure emerged from the sand. It was hollowed out by termites. Scientists were determined to solve its mystery. In 2000, they began excavating the site near Abydos, Ubidos. An American team of experts soon discovered a boat that was 70 feet long, and it wasn't alone. In total, there were 14 boats neatly resting next to each other. It was impossible to completely dig out the boats because of their poor condition. Luckily, the wood was preserved enough to get a sample. Analyses revealed that the boats were around 5,000 years old, the oldest fleet in human history to this date. The time of their construction predates the pyramids at Giza by half a millennium. Each ship of the fleet rested in a vault that matched its dimensions. The room was roughly a third of the size of a tennis court. It had mud brick walls that featured more than 120 drawings of boats. Ancient Egyptians incised them on whitewashed walls that were excellently preserved. Scientists have known about these mysterious chambers for well over a century. 1901, 1902. A British archaeologist, Arthur Weigel, stumbled upon a strange structure west of the River Nile. His team caught a glimpse of the interior walls. Sadly, a section of the roof collapsed, so they had to call off further exploration. Researchers abandoned the site, but its location remained on the maps. The boat's position first led scientists to think that they rested on a bank of the mighty Nile. But there was a problem with this theory. Today, the river flows almost 7 miles west of Abydos. Further studies of the surrounding terrain showed the Nile didn't change its course throughout history. Also, if the boats floated near a dock, they would be in unstable positions. The 14 vessels at Abydos were perfectly parallel to each other. There was only one conclusion possible. Someone had deliberately placed them like that. They must have gone through a lot of effort. Each boat had enough room for up to 30 rowers. These vessels could really float. They weren't models, but scholars still don't know if they actually sailed any body of water in ancient Egypt. This doesn't diminish the importance of the find. Previously, archaeologists found only small-scale models. In King Tut's tomb alone, there were 35 boat models. For a long time, these figurines were the only clues as to how ancient Egyptian vessels looked like. The boat's design confirms that they were the real deal. They are the earliest surviving examples of something called built boats. Ancient people constructed primitive vessels by hollowing out large tree trunks. The alternative was reed that was tied together to form a raft. The boats at Abydos had planks tied together. This was a major breakthrough in shipbuilding. During their lifetime, the boats must have seemed impressive. Timber was a valuable commodity at the time. There was no wood in the desert. Cedar had to be imported from Lebanon. The only person who could afford such luxury was the pharaoh. Studying the area around the ancient fleet provided more answers. Scientists discovered a mud brick structure where Egyptians worshipped the pharaoh. Its approximate date of construction matches that of the wooden boats. The same bricks out of which this building was made were used to encase the fleet. At the time of their construction, the rooms they were stored in had a ceiling. That's the section that archaeologists stumbled upon in the early 20th century. Just like mummies and coffins, these marvelous ships rested inside splendid vaults. The exterior of these rooms was also impressive. The outer walls originally had a plaster of white limestone. It reflected sunlight. In the desert sun, the structure housing the boats must have shone from miles away. Ancient Egyptian builders used the same technique to cover the pyramids 500 years later. Today, their surface looks jagged, but it wasn't always like this. When they were constructed, the pyramids had a top layer of fine white limestone. Their surface was smooth and it gleamed in the sunlight. Instead of stairs, the outer layer of the pyramids was more of a sleek ramp. Archaeologists were left with one final question. Which pharaoh owned the fleet? The answer lay just a mile from the site. This is where the tomb of a pharaoh from the 5th dynasty rested, King Senwosret III. Its time and style of construction matched the ones of the chambers with boats. The very end of his rule might explain how the boats ended up in the middle of the desert. The pharaoh probably passed away in northern Egypt. Then his body was transported down the Nile to Abydos in a marvelous procession of decorated boats. The vessels were later lowered to chambers near the final resting place of their owner. This had a symbolic meaning. In the ancient Egyptians' belief system, ships played a key role. Their supreme deity was Ra. He traveled through the sky during the day in the form of the sun. At nighttime, he sailed through the netherworld in a solar boat. The pharaoh identified himself with Ra. That's why he needed boats in the afterlife. That was the only way to regenerate himself. Just as the sun rises every day above the horizon, This belief existed for thousands of years. The more famous pharaoh Khufu also had a ship. Scientists found it in 1954 next to his pyramid at Giza. It is some 4 centuries younger than the fleet at Abydos, but Khufu's ship was almost 2 times longer. The Great Pyramid of Giza and King Tut's tomb are some of the most famous archaeological finds in Egypt. But there are many more secrets hiding beneath the endless sands of the Sahara Desert. Recently, 2020, archaeologists found a lost city there. They have labeled it as the most important discovery since King Tut's tomb, 1922. The city of Aten is some 3,000 years old. Historians hope it will give them a unique insight into the everyday life of ancient Egyptians. The famous archaeologist and Egyptologist Zahi Hawass proclaimed the site a lost golden city. Aten sits some 300 miles south of Egypt's capital, Cairo. It is close to the famous Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists first found sections of mud brick walls that spread out in all directions. They discovered complete rooms with tools of everyday life inside. The research team unearthed a bakery, a residential neighborhood, and an administrative district. They all date back to the time when the Egyptian civilization was the wealthiest in its long history. They were also the first to make objects from iron. In 1911, scientists found a set of iron beads near a village in Lower Egypt, El Girza. These are the earliest known iron artifacts. The discovery is literally out of this world. Ancient people made them by beating into shape a piece of a meteorite. The 9 beads were once part of an ornate necklace. They are now blackened and corroded, which is perfectly normal for a piece of jewelry that is over 5,000 years old. They consist of an iron-nickel alloy. Researchers were impressed by the skill of ancient jewelers who processed the beads. Their craftsmanship is more impressive when you think that they didn't know the stellar origins of the material. The Great Pyramid of Giza also has a remarkable feature. An international research group investigated the electromagnetic response of the structure to radio waves. They found that the pyramid has the ability to concentrate electromagnetic energy inside it. This occurred inside its chambers as well as under the pyramid's base. It contains an underground, unfinished chamber. It seems that the electromagnetic response is connected with the properties of limestone, the Great Pyramid's main building material. The research results might have a practical application. The way solar cells and nanosensors function could be improved by this remarkable find.
There are mysterious plasma bubbles floating around the pyramids of Giza. As bizarre as that might sound, let's get one thing clear right off the bat. There's nothing extraterrestrial going on here. Plasma bubbles are those weather anomalies that form in a layer of Earth's atmosphere called the ionosphere. This is an invisible layer surrounding our planet that stretches roughly from 50 to 400 miles above Earth's surface, right at the edge of space. In this layer, the sun, being the giant hot power that it is, basically cooks gases, splitting them into electrically charged particles called plasma. Here's where it gets interesting. At night, especially near the equator, these charged particles get disturbed, and when a bunch of them suddenly vanish at the same time, it forms what we call a plasma bubble. Imagine it like a big empty pocket where the plasma is missing or its quantity is lowered. But it's only considered a plasma bubble if this phenomenon occurs on a large scale, typically around 62 miles in size. If you're already packing your suitcase for Egypt and have put binoculars to look at the tips of the pyramids, I'm sorry to say that we can't see these plasma bubbles with the unaided eye. It's all happening way above our heads, completely invisible to us. Scientists need to use special equipment, like the Latitude Long Range Ionosphere Radar, or LARID, to detect these bubbles. This advanced technology helps researchers track and observe the movement and formation of plasma bubbles in real time. This formation, by the way, can be triggered by solar storms. That brings us to November 2023, when an impressive solar storm occurred. On a scale from 1 to 5, this one was classified as a G3, which is considered a strong event. Solar storms occur when sunspots are basically cooler, darker areas on the sun's surface, release bursts of energy into space. These flares triggered several geomagnetic storms on Earth. While this might sound like doomsday stuff, it didn't disrupt our daily lives too much. In fact, it was great news for skywatchers, since the solar storm created stunning auroras, with the northern lights visible as far south as Greece and Turkey. But this particular storm in 2023 also had another interesting consequence. It caused the largest plasma bubble ever recorded by the Chinese radar. This phenomenon was so massive that it covered regions as far apart as the Egyptian pyramids and the Midway Islands in the Pacific Ocean. Now that's a huge distance, and it is a big deal for science. And that's because plasma bubbles are a growing threat to modern technology. Experts say they can disrupt satellite communications and GPS systems. So if you're using Google Maps or Waze and suddenly it can't figure out where you are, a plasma bubble might be to blame. Great. We now know what's going on with those bubbles, detected above the pyramids of Giza. But things get even weirder inside this ancient construction. Apparently, the Great Pyramid of Giza has the ability to concentrate electromagnetic energy within its interior. A couple of years ago, a group of researchers decided to see what would happen if they took this ancient architecture and hit it with radio waves. I mean, waves that are similar to the kind your phone uses, but on a much larger scale, up to 1,900 feet long. But since they couldn't just start blasting radio waves at the actual pyramid, they did the next best thing: computer modeling. Using these simulations, the researchers discovered something incredible. The Great Pyramid can actually concentrate electromagnetic energy within its internal chambers, as well as underneath its base, where an unfinished chamber is located. By concentrate, I mean something like trap it. For example, when you shout into a cave, you hear your voice echo back, right? The sound waves don't just disappear, they bounce around and get focused. Similarly, when radio waves hit the pyramid, they don't just pass through or around it. Instead, they get absorbed, bounce around, and focus inside and underneath the pyramid. Our list of mysterious phenomena surrounding the Egyptian pyramids doesn't end there. Inside the pyramid, there's a long, narrow passage that leads to what's known as the King's Chamber. This room sits at the center of the pyramid, and it's believed to have been the final resting place of Pharaoh Khufu, the ancient Egyptian leader who commissioned the entire thing over 4,000 years ago. When visitors step into the King's Chamber, two things normally strike them: the room's incredible acoustics and its heavy, imposing structure, which is entirely lined with red granite. Recently, scientists have started to connect these two facts. Some researchers now believe that the King's Chamber might be able to catch or pick up sound energy generated from other parts of the pyramid. In other words, this room might have been designed to amplify sound in a way that no other chamber in the pyramid can. To test this theory, researchers conducted an experiment where they sang in the Queen's Chamber, which is located directly below the King's Chamber. Here's where it gets wild. The music couldn't be heard in the lower underground rooms of the pyramid, but it sounded loud and clear in the King's Chamber. One possible explanation for this is the type of stone used in the King's Chamber: pink granite. Granite is known for its piezoelectric properties, meaning it can absorb energy from its surroundings, like sound vibrations, and convert it into electrical energy. This suggests that the chamber's unique acoustics might be due to more than just the shape of the room. It could be that the granite itself plays a role in amplifying and concentrating sound waves. According to scientists, these discoveries open up a whole new field of research into the pyramid's potential. Could the ancient pyramids have somehow harnessed the energy created by sound waves, or even Earth's natural vibrations? It might sound far-fetched, but considering the granite's piezoelectric properties are well documented in modern science, it's not entirely impossible. Who knows? Maybe we've only just scratched the surface of what the pyramids were truly capable of. Speaking of just scratching the surface, there's even more to think about, like how the pyramids ended up in such a perfect location. It seems the builders lined up the Great Pyramid with the cardinal points, meaning its sides are almost perfectly aligned with the four main directions: north, south, east, and west. There are many theories about how they did it, but one study suggests that Egyptians might have used the fall equinox to achieve this perfect alignment. During the equinox, the sun rises and sets directly in the east and west. It probably made it easier for builders to use the sun's position as a guide. By watching the sun during this time, they could make sure the pyramids were positioned just right. If we think about all these strange things about the pyramids, I mean their perfect alignment, the ability to concentrate radio waves, and the materials used in the chambers that might generate electrical energy, could the real purpose of the pyramids actually be much more complex than just being tombs? Well, Nikola Tesla thought so. It is said that the famous inventor and engineer was kind of obsessed with the Egyptian pyramids, and he wondered if they might actually be giant energy transmitters. He believed the shape and position of the pyramids could help them function as huge generators, capable of producing free, limitless energy. Some researchers agree with Tesla and believe that these massive monuments might have been designed as giant power plants. According to their theory, builders could have figured out how to move ions, those electrically charged particles in the atmosphere, by placing materials like copper, gold, and silver around the pyramids. So, it's definitely possible that the ancient Egyptians created a sustainable, renewable power source. Although this is a very interesting thought, we haven't been able to confirm this theory, and the true purpose of the pyramids remain one of humanity's biggest mysteries.
Experts found the oldest lakeside village ever discovered in Europe underneath the waters of Lake Ohrid in Albania. The lake itself is ancient too. It's said to be one of the oldest lakes in the world. Before this discovery, a village in the Italian Alps held the record. It was about 7,000 years old. But radiocarbon dating shows that the village under Lake Ohrid was built between 6,000 and 5,080 BCE, which means it's around 1,000 years older than any other village in Europe. Around 200 to 500 people lived in this village. It goes back to the time of the Neolithic period. In fact, these people were likely one of the first ever communities that decided to settle down. This discovery wouldn't be so interesting if it didn't have an enigma. Villagers made a wooden fortress of spikes all around their village to stay safe. But safe from what? Something mysterious. These locals went through all the trouble of building their homes on stilts over the lake and surrounding it with spikes for defense. Why did they make things so complex? That's what archaeologists are trying to figure out. Are there any other unusual settlements? Sure thing. For example, Göbekli Tepe. This place takes us back to the very beginning of permanent settlements. It also makes us question everything we thought we knew about how organized societies started. It seems like the fellas who lived there were into something pretty special, like rituals or hanging out together as a community. Around 11,000 years ago, ancient humans carved huge blocks of limestone and somehow managed to drag them to the other side of the mound. These blocks were like canvases painted with images of animals and people. They were placed in circles. Underneath these stones, you'll find the same massive pillars as the ones from the other side of the mound. Around 250 of these pillars hang out on the surface, and researchers also found around 60 of them during the dig. These are like messages from the past, telling us about people who once lived here and the stuff they were up to. These findings challenge traditional timelines and interpretations of early human society. While Göbekli Tepe has gained popularity among tourists, there's another site nearby, Karahan Tepe. It remains lesser known, but equally significant. Both sites challenge the belief that animal farming led to settled life. In fact, it appears people became sedentary first, and then they started animal domestication. They also question the traditional idea that organized societies followed the development of agriculture. These ancient sites suggest that organized communities existed before agriculture, possibly with cultic or communal rituals. These structures suggest complex, multi-purpose functions rather than just religious ones. People gathered in these places for discussion and storytelling, fostering a collective identity. These buildings might mark the beginnings of a cohesive community, showing the emergence of horizontal hierarchies and knowledge sharing. Let's move to the other side of the world. Mexico's 1,500-year-old unknown pyramids are worth talking about. These pyramids have stood strong for all these centuries, all thanks to a secret ingredient from the prickly pear cactus. With its help, indigenous builders crafted these ancient marvels. Gray volcanic rock pyramids rise like a mini mountain range. As we get closer, it becomes clear that skilled hands etched identical steps into the hard rock, forming a staircase of the largest pyramid. The two smaller pyramids, called the House of the Wind and the House of the Longest Night, share the same human touch. Legend has it that these structures hid treasures. But it wasn't until Mexican archaeologists started digging there in the early 2000s that the secrets began to unravel. The House of the 13 Heavens was built around 540 BCE to keep track of time. After all, it wasn't so easy for ancient people to keep track of dates in the days before clocks and calendars. Instead, they looked at the skies and celestial objects. Think of the pyramid as their own cosmic calendar. Its corners matched up with solstices and important dates for planting and harvesting. When you stand on the steps these days, the sun lines up perfectly with the corresponding corner. But these pyramids aren't just about telling time. Quiroz and Zepeda, archaeologists on a mission, are trying to piece together the clues. They've recovered a few artifacts, and that's how they've learned that the ancient builders used the sticky substance from prickly pear cactus leaves to hold their creations together. This ancient technique is still used by some indigenous people today. One surprise after another. The House of the 13 Heavens reveals a skeleton older than the pyramid itself, nearly a millennium older. This means that people carried this body with them for 950 years. It's another mystery. The next stop is Duna de Bologna. It's a Spanish sand dune hiding Roman ruins. This sand pile is near the edge of Europe, reaching out toward North Africa. It's more than 98 feet tall and 656 feet wide. As the winds move and the dune shifts, it reveals pieces of history hidden deep within it. Climate change boosts those winds, moving the dune even more. As it migrates, it shows us traces of people who used to live here. Archaeologists have been busy digging around, and they found ancient tombs. Imagine exploring a sandy maze and stumbling upon these tombs filled with history. The sand has acted as a protector, preserving bones, jewelry, and arrowheads. But that's not all. Nearby, there's an archaeological site from the 2nd century BCE. That's when the Romans were hanging out here. They had a whole city down there, complete with baths, a theater, and a temple. And it was built on top of an older Phoenician settlement. An earthquake shook things up a long time ago, and people left the city. For centuries, it lay hidden under the sand. Modern historians and archaeologists are excited about what else this shifting landscape will reveal. Fingers crossed that this sandy time capsule stays safe and keeps sharing its stories with generations to come. In Peru, archaeologists are exploring the 3,000-year-old Condor's Passageway. A what? Okay, so archaeologists were digging around a place called Chavan de Huantar, where the Chavan people lived. This place is around 190 miles away from Lima, Peru's capital. So, the Chavan people were advanced artists. They loved drawing birds and wild cats in their paintings. And they went way back, even before the Inca Empire became a big deal. They were some of the first societies that settled down and started farming in Peru's highlands of the Andes Mountains. That's more than 2,000 years before the Incas showed up. Archaeologists found a secret passage in one of the temple buildings. They called it the Condor's Passageway. It was a hidden hallway that had been locked away for ages. Lara Croft would love it there. This passage leads to other rooms inside the temple. It gives us a peek into what life was like then. Inside this hidden hallway, the researchers found some neat stuff. Like a big piece of pottery weighing as much as a big bag of potatoes and decorated with a drawing of a condor's head and wings. The condor, by the way, is a power symbol for the ancient Andeans. Archaeologists also found some pottery. All of this stuff was discovered in May 2022 when the entrance to the hidden passage was finally opened. Pretty new. The temple complex where they found these ancient items has other structures, like terraces. And there's still more to uncover. The tricky thing is going forward in these hidden passages. The archaeologists had to send in cameras mounted on robots to explore them first. They didn't want to risk messing up the ancient building or, getting stuck in there. Let's wait and see what else they'll uncover.
Canada is known for its snowy mountains, untouched forests, pristine lakes, friendly, helpful people, eh? And that delicious maple syrup. Now they get to add something else to the list: the world's oldest water. Back in 2016, researchers drilled down 1.9 miles and found an ancient pool of water at Kidmine, Ontario. The water was believed to be at least 2 billion years old. Not fresh water. The water was found bubbling up in caverns deep underground, inside the 3 million square miles of the Canadian Shield, one of the world's largest geological continental shields. The area endures very little plate tectonic activity, possibly explaining how the water remained untouched for so long. Scientists and researchers analyzed the water and found dissolved gases of helium, argon, xenon, and neon, untouched by any outside source. There were even traces of microbes dating back billions of years. This was a stunning find for science that allowed us to gaze back in time at a lost world. If life-supporting water can be found miles below the Earth, it could be possible to find the same thing on other planets, like Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter's moons as well. Point Nemo is the furthest point from land on Earth, officially called the Oceanic Point of Inaccessibility, kind of like my parking space. It's so far from land that the closest humans to it are usually astronauts. The International Space Station orbits the Earth from around 250 miles away, while the closest populated spot to Point Nemo on Earth is more than 1,670 miles in all directions. Since its real title is a bit long, it was nicknamed Point Nemo after Captain Nemo from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Nemo means no one in Latin, which suits this area perfectly because there's no people around. The Crooked Forest is found in Gryfino, Poland. It's a grove of 400 unusually curved pine trees that were planted around the 1930s. They bend northwards at a sharp 90-degree angle from the tree's base, but then remarkably turn back to grow straight up into the sky. Some of the curves reach out 3 to 9 feet sideways, but the trees are healthy, and many grow to nearly 50 feet tall. These crooked pines are surrounded by a larger forest of straight-growing pines. There's no explanation as to why they're bent the way they are. The theories for this strange development range from weather conditions to human intervention, but no one knows for sure. The Hamza River is one of the longest and widest rivers in the world, and it sits right underneath the Amazon River itself. At a depth of 2.5 miles, this river flows a little more than a trickle compared to the Great River above it. The push of the Amazon River's water into the Atlantic is around 35 million gallons per second, while the Hamza only manages 1 million gallons per second. Either way, there's no choice but to go with the flow. Around the same length as the Amazon itself, 3,700 miles, it's the width that stunned the science world. It's 125 to 250 miles wide, compared to the Amazon's width of about 1/2 mile to 60 miles wide. The Cave of Crystals was discovered in 2000 when miners drained water from a zinc mine in Chihuahua, Mexico. The state, not the dog. What scientists found was an enchanting cave filled with colossal gypsum crystals that were larger than 33 feet and over 3 feet wide. They were so pure that scientists were unable to work out how old they were, but researchers believe they discovered a 50,000-year-old sample of bacteria inside one of the crystals. Also known as the River of Five Colors, Caño Cristales is one of the most amazing natural wonders in all of Colombia. The area is filled with waterfalls, pools, and caverns, but the river itself is the true wonder. Every year, between June and November, the river hypnotizes spectators with amazing yellows, greens, blues, blacks, and red shades to create a liquid rainbow. A red plant that grows in the riverbed is the main cause of this unique phenomenon. Other colors come from the black rocks, green algae, clear water, and yellow sand, producing a pearly effect. The colors change every year because of the plant's growth from rainfall, temperature, and sunlight. During the rest of the year, the riverbed appears in a dull green hue. Scientists in Hawaii discovered that red algae were making sounds in the waters around coral reefs. The noise was believed to come from the loud snapping shrimp, until researchers put the sound and presence of algae together and started monitoring the bubbles. As the algae use photosynthesis for food, they produce tiny bubbles that collect on their surfaces. When the bubbles separate off the plant, they make a ping or popping sound. Reefs can be smothered and suffocate if they're covered by too many algae. Discovering that photosynthesis makes a sound could be useful for the reef's preservation. The algae could provide early warnings for scientists, so they can stop these vulnerable areas from being overrun. After heavy rains and seismic activity hit Kenya's Great Rift Valley in March 2018, a vast chasm expanded across the land. The rift measured quite a few miles long and was over 50 feet wide in some parts. Essentially, it was tearing Africa in two. Africa sits on two tectonic plates, the Nubian and the Somali plate. Deep below Earth's surface, driven by the active mantle, the plates are being pulled apart. This creates the huge, extraordinary rifts we see on the surface. It will take millions of years for the large continent to actually separate into two pieces. I won't be around then. But when it does, it'll also create a new ocean basin. The Eucalyptus deglupta thrive in the tropical forests of Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Philippines, and they're like something straight out of a video game or fantasy movie. Growing up to an enormous height of 250 feet in its native environment, this one-of-a-kind tree has bark that displays green, bright blue, orange, purple, and red streaks as it ages, kinda like me. As strips of bark fall away, the tree's colors change, and the bright green inner bark is revealed. Off of the beautiful island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, there's a spectacular view that has to be seen to believe. You'll need to hop on a plane to get a bird's-eye view, though. What looks like an underwater waterfall is actually sand from the shores being pushed off of a high coastal shelf by ocean currents. It falls all the way into the deep dark depths of the ocean on the southernmost tip of the island. Most of the ocean waters around the island are only 26 to 490 feet deep, but this deep plunge drops down a few miles, creating the illusion of a waterfall. This oceanic shelf didn't exist a few million years ago, but seafloor spreading has created this quite recently. The walking trees of the Amazon are one of the most unique and puzzling ways plants move to get to the perfect spot for everything they need. These trees walk by allowing the new roots to replace the older ones while searching for more sunlight in the dense forest. As the roots fix themselves into the new soil, the tree bends towards the new roots, leaving the old roots to slowly rise. Traveling to a new place with better sunlight and more solid ground can take a couple of years. This is because they only move around 0.8 of an inch a day, or around 65 feet a year. Now you can just imagine this going on in your front yard. You plant the tree here, and next year it's all the way over there. Ah well. Down in southern Costa Rica, 300 stone petrospheres are dotted all over the forest. Some weigh as much as a bowling ball, while others can be up to 15 tons. Their purpose and how they were made so long ago are lost to us. Discovered in the 1930s, a lot of them were removed and transported around the world. It wasn't until the 1970s that we began to preserve and protect these stones. While the stones are mostly a mystery, archaeologists know they're made from granodiorite rock, similar to granite. If they were carved by a civilization, their near-perfect shape must have been made by chiseling away with small stones. Ethiopia's Danakil Depression is an environment that looks like it belongs on another planet. Filled with lava pools, bright neon-colored hot springs, and vast salt flats, it's also the contender for the hottest year-round temperature of 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Poisonous gases fill the area with hot springs filled with acid. Worse, it only receives up to 8 inches of annual rainfall. It's also one of the lowest places on the planet, at 410 feet below sea level. No wonder it's one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. Hey, sounds great. No crowds. Let's go.
We've all been afraid of the dark at some point in our lives, haven't we? I mean, do you remember getting tucked into bed by your mom or dad after they read you some scary fairy tale with monsters and dragons or even dinosaurs? But just as your parents were about to turn the lights off and silently step out of your room, you remembered. What if there was something hiding under your bed? Or worse, what if some spooky creature was stuck somewhere in the closet? You could probably get up and check, but it was too dark out there. Wouldn't it be great to have some source of light that would come from within your body? You could always use it whenever you get surrounded by darkness. Unfortunately, as humans, we aren't able to do that. But there are a bunch of creatures out there that can, in fact, light themselves up. That's thanks to a little something scientists call bioluminescence. Animals and fish living in the ocean tend to have this talent more often than others. And you can find these creatures anywhere, close to the surface or deep down at the bottom. 2.5 miles deep if you have a knack for numbers. These creatures use their light for a lot of things, like communicating with other members of their species, luring in prey, and even scaring away enemies. Bioluminescence is basically an organism's ability to emit its own light. Chemistry has a lot to do with it. Such animals use 2 chemicals, one called luciferin and the other called luciferase. Add a bit of oxygen and bam! Light! Should you ever wonder if you actually observe bioluminescence or if someone just dropped a glow stick in the ocean, be on the lookout for neon blue, green, or even red sparkles in the sea. They're usually spread over a large area. This can even make the water look like glitter or a starry sky. You can thank squid, tiny crustaceans, and algae for this romantic atmosphere. Now, I've got another unusual phenomenon for you. How about a golden waterfall? I'm not kidding, it actually exists, and it's a natural phenomenon. To see it, you have to drive to Yosemite National Park to the Horsetail Fall. Make sure to plan your trip in winter or early spring. That's the only time during the year when you can see this awesome phenomenon. It doesn't need any scientific explanation. It's nothing more than sunlight at dusk hitting the waterfall in such a unique way that it makes it look like a river of lava. Or gold, your choice. That's the reason why during this time of year, the Horsetail Fall is also named the Fire Fall. Unfortunately, this phenomenon is becoming less and less visible within the years, mostly because of drought and other issues connecting with the melting of snow. So, should you ever decide to visit, keep an eye on the waterfall since the effect is very brief. Ever heard of a dirty thunderstorm? It's also called volcanic lightning. Apparently, specialists looking into the phenomenon have yet to fully grasp what it is. When a regular thunderstorm happens, particles with positive and negative charges collide, hence the giant spark we call lightning. It also makes a lot of noise, which you can recognize as thunder. But when a volcano is erupting, some of the volcanic ash particles get electrically charged, and while getting projected into the air with a huge force, they collide and cause electrical discharges. This whole process makes it look like there's lightning coming from the volcano itself. Imagine all that ash, gas, and smoke coming from the crater, and then add some electricity to the mix. It'll make the whole picture look really bizarre. No wonder this phenomenon is called the dirty thunderstorm. Now, how about clouds that look like waves? Those are called asperitas clouds, and they're actually quite close to the ground. unlike your regular day-to-day clouds. The name comes from the word aspero, which in Latin translates to rough or uneven. On rare occasion, you may spot such clouds when the weather is calm, but they're mostly associated with thunderstorms. These clouds appear during unstable atmospheric conditions, and surprisingly, they don't produce rain. Even though they do resemble dark storm-like clouds, they also create random patterns, tricking your eyes into thinking you're looking at the surface of the sea from under the water. Another impressive kind of cloud is called mammatus clouds. What makes them so special is a series of bulges emerging from the base of each cloud. One such cloud enters a level in the atmosphere where the wind direction changes. You can see these wave-like patterns in the sky. Australia is the place for you if you like surfing, but not all the waves you can catch there are made of water. Near a town called Hayden, there's a mysterious wave made out of rocks. This granite formation supposedly dates back to 2.63 billion years ago. That's way before dinosaurs started hanging around the planet. Standing at 49 feet high and 360 feet long, the wave was formed as a result of two processes: weathering and erosion. There's softer sediment at the base of the wave rock, which was chemically weathered by groundwater. Winds and rain did the rest of the job, causing the erosion of the rest of the formation. Its red, yellow, and gray stripes are made of iron hydroxide, carbonates, and other chemical compounds that were washed down by the rain. You've made it to Australia, so stick around a bit more. There's one more location here that seems unreal. You'll need to fly over this one, however, if you want the best picture. In the western part of the country, surrounded by green woodlands, there's a series of lakes. They're all a staggering shade of bright pink. Out of them all, the most famous is Lake Hillier, a 2,000-foot-long reservoir. It's surrounded by both sand and a forest of eucalyptus trees. This makes the cartoon-like hue of the lake stand out even more. One of the many theories explaining the color of these mysterious lakes is connected with algae. These algae appear to gather high levels of a substance called beta-carotene, which has a red-orange pigment in it. Another explanation involves haloarchaea. Those are microorganisms that sometimes look red. Even if you don't enjoy flying, the lakes are great for taking a swim. They're not toxic, even though they have loads of salt in them. This means you'll be able to stay afloat easily, and the water won't damage your swimsuit. During winter up north in Canada, a bizarre phenomenon happens at Lake Abraham in Alberta. Underneath the frozen surface, you can spot some weird objects that look like frozen jellyfish. It's definitely not the case, as these creepy formations are just frozen methane bubbles. Those are pockets of gas that were trapped underwater and got stuck there after the lake had frozen. They appear when leaves and grass fall into the water and bacteria digest them. This process transforms them into methane. This phenomenon is as beautiful and strange as it is dangerous. The pockets of methane can easily become highly flammable. When the temperatures rise during the spring, the ice melts and these bubbles start popping and fizzing. It's a spectacular sight to observe. Picture a lake filled with soda. Remember not to bring any source of fire. It can be very dangerous for visitors. You can check out these types of lakes all across Canada's Banff National Park. Nature often tends to make its own music. Just listen to the sound of crickets at night, or the soothing noise of a waterfall. But in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, there's a strange geological phenomenon which takes nature soundtracks to a completely different level. These are called the ringing rocks, and scientists still can't explain their unusual behavior. If you strike these rocks with a heavy object, like a hammer or another rock, the stones will make a ringing sound, as if they were hollow, but they're not. What makes the ringing rocks even more bizarre, apart from the mysterious sound they make, is that no animal wants to hang around there. Even though the rocks are surrounded by a thick forest, scientists haven't managed to trace any animal activity in the area yet. Even more striking is the fact that despite all the trees around the rocks, you won't find any leaves lying on the boulders. What makes these rocks so unappealing for both animals and vegetation is still up for debate.